The scariest experience I ever had in a forest was when I was about 12 years old. My parents owned about 6 acres of forest and 6 acres of garden, clear area. One afternoon we had already picked all the garden veggies that we had to, and I was allowed to do what I wanted since we were all through with the work for the day. I proceeded to take a walk down into the forest. There was a clearing of some sort that my dad had made to drive down into the forest, but it could only be accessed by a 4-wheel drive since there were lots of little stumps and bushes. This forest was pretty much untouched woods. We had previously had to bury my little pet chihuahua due to her getting very sick and passing away some weeks before this particular day, and I wanted to visit her grave. We had buried her way back at the very back of the property and made here a little grave that we could visit if we wanted to, and this was a pretty day, so I decided to go visit my little canine friend's grave, alone. I went all by myself. I stayed a few minutes and said few words and left. As I was starting my way back through the 6 acres of woods, not having any fear at all, I started feeling like I was being watched, a very strong sense that I was being observed by someone or something. I stopped and looked around, but I didn't see anything that looked out of the ordinary. Actually, everything was eerily quiet. Something in my extrasensory part of my brain told me to run and run as fast as I could, or I may never make it out of those woods. I started to run, but I tried to just run normally and not make it look like I was panicking, but inside I was panicking. I kept turning and looking over my shoulder and didn't stop. I felt like I was being pursued, but at that point I just booked it out of there. Thankfully, I made it to the clearing and safety of where my parents were. I knew I was safe then at that point. I started to think that maybe it had all been in my head and I overacted. I mean, I had been in those woods countless times exploring without any fear ever. Later on that evening, we heard on the news that a dangerous escaped convict was on the loose. Can you guess where? He was in the woods where I was. That was where authorities had pinpointed him, and at the time I was in the very section of woods where he was. I am glad that I listened to my inner voice to run and not stop. Who knows if he would have heard me or not, but I am very glad to know that God planted that in my brain. I believe that He talks to us. It may not be an audible voice that we can hear, but He does put thoughts in our minds. A few years ago, I was hiking in the woods in northern New Hampshire when I ran across what looked like an abandoned house. I love finding places just like this to explore, so I obviously was very curious about the house's content. There was a pathway to the house made of stones that had been covered with weeds and various other vegetation. The house was surrounded by overgrown grass and tree limbs that had fallen, making it difficult to get to the porch. The front porch was small and made of bricks that had a layer of moss grown all over it. It was obvious that no one had been there in many years. The front door was intact and locked from the inside. I didn't see any broken windows that I could fit through, and the windows on the front of the house were covered in a thick layer of dust and dirt, so I couldn't see inside. I checked if the windows would open, but I suppose the wood had warped and swelled, so none of them would open. I gave up on getting inside the house and settled for walking around the back side of the house to explore the grounds around the house instead. When I made my way to the back side of the house, I found a window that was a bit less dirty and was able to peek inside. I couldn't see much. What I did see was an area rug and what looked like a small table beside the window. I decided to check the back door on the off chance that it would open and I could find out what exactly was in this mysterious house. Lo and behold, the back door was locked as well, but when I gave it a slight push I could feel the frame was loose and weak. It didn't take much force to push the door open, breaking the frame. Yes, I know this is considered breaking and entering, but as I said above, it was obvious no one had been there in many years, and I have a fascination with such places. I couldn't just walk away without knowing what was inside. What I saw once inside completely took my breath away. I was standing in a kitchen, complete with dirty dishes in the sink, a drain board with old cups and glasses turned upside down from being washed but covered in a very thick layer of dust. There was a small kitchen table with drinking glasses on it and a newspaper that dated back to June of 1959. The cabinets were stocked with dishes, and there was a tall pantry that contained various jars of preserves and fruits and veggies that had obviously been canned by hand. Everything was covered in dust. I continued to walk through the house and found each room I entered to be completely furnished and covered in dust and dirt. There were spider webs through the entire house, as well as signs of rodent activity. There was dresser drawers with clothes that had been chewed and nested in by what I assumed were mice. In the closet hung clothes that had begun to deteriorate and had holes from insects. Upon further inspection of a child's dress that I found, it seemed that the clothes were handmade. There were 2 bedrooms, one of which was obviously a room for children, with 2 twin beds that were perfectly made up. The bedding was in very poor condition but seemed to be hand-stitched also. Same thing in the other room, only it contained just 1 larger bed rather than 2. The cabinet in the bathroom had a few toiletries, a straight-edge razor, as well as towels that were neatly folded but had now become nests for small animals. At this point, I was very creeped out and began feeling as if I was being watched. I decided it was time to leave this strange house that appeared to be stuck in time. As I walked through the short hallway that led back into the living room area, I decided to see what kind of pictures were hanging on the walls. I wiped some of the dust off one of the pictures hanging near the doorway of what appeared to be the parents' bedroom and discovered it was a photo of a wedding. The photo was very faded and appeared to have some type of mildew growing behind the glass. I decided to take a moment to check out a few more pictures in the frames that hung throughout the home. Most were of scenery or various still life subjects. I found another photo hanging in the living room near the front door. This one was of the entire family. It was in worse condition than the previous photo, but I could clearly make out a man, a woman holding what appeared to be a very small infant, and 2 children sitting on the floor at their feet. I found this very odd, as I hadn't seen any signs of an infant anywhere in the home. I don't know what could have possibly become of this family that lived in the house. Did they leave for work and school and never made it home? Did they decide to take off and leave all their worldly possessions behind? Why? What happened to the infant in the family photo? To this day, I have many questions that I have no clue how to find answers to. I stumbled upon a home that day, not a house. That was a family's home that they lived in, experienced life in, and mysteriously disappeared from. I've never been back, and never intend to. Just thinking about that place creeps me out. It was as if this family had no clue they'd never return to their home the day they last walked out the front door. And it was apparent that no one had come to look for them. So there you have it. I found a family's home hidden deep in the woods of northern New Hampshire. Let me preface this by saying I worked security for nearly 2 years. All of my assignments were at night. My favorite post was in the middle of nowhere. I was isolated and did my rounds on foot. This freaked my supervisor out because I was an 18-year-old female. The scariest happenings were skunks and the occasional cat fight. I liked the peace and quiet. Now on to the answer. When I was 21 years old, I looked much younger. The guy I was dating was 34 years old and looked much older. More than once, when we were parking, we heard a rap on the window. It was a police officer making sure we weren't up to shenanigans. It usually ended with me producing a driver's license to prove my age. One night, we were walking in the woods. We were talking about how perfect the night was. It was a chilly autumn night, my favorite time of the year. He grabbed me and said that it was the perfect night to rape me. I went cold and elbowed myself out of his grip. He said he was joking and would never hurt me. Guess what, buddy? Joking about raping someone is not funny. I told him that I wished a police officer was making rounds in the woods. We broke up shortly after that. I still walk around at night.